paying probably 3 times what a bank would pay interest on your money. But you can see a little bit on the left side some of the things that we do in the church arena. But really what I want to talk to you about today is on the right side, because in the arena of plan giving, which is a kind of a label that nobody knows what it means, it's people talking about how to properly set up your estate. We are in churches trying to be educational in nature, and we offer retirement income options for people on fixed income. We'll get into a little bit about that, but that's just a little bit about what we do. We office in Arlington. Our sole member is the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention, and anyway, sometimes it helps people to understand what we do before we talk about what we would encourage you to do. Let me say that in the arena of estate planning, we don't sell anything. We really are just trying to be a blessing to the congregants so that they can get the resources it takes to probably get some critical things done that I would hope that most of you have, but I would suspect that many of you do not. Let's start with a story. This is my family on July 25th, 1987, the day I wed Laura Harris. July 25th, 1987. I know what you're thinking. He has not aged. Dr. Tom Harris married us. It was Laura's daddy. Laura's daddy was a pastor. She's a preacher's kid. Laura's dad had been struggling with a cancer that we knew was terminal for years. God had given him extended years of life with a very terminal disease. But on the Wednesday after this Saturday service in a cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean, we got a ship-to-shore call that her father had passed away. And so, the funny thing about pictures is they kind of remind you of things. I'll never forget the last thing her daddy said to me when I leaned over to hug his neck. He said, "You take care of my girl." Tom knew his time was short. He had 2 girls. We put the weddings on back-to-back weekends, and we were just praying that he could get through both of them. Got through ours and passed away before Laura's little sister. Told another man, said, "Something happens to me, you make sure those girls get married on time." And so this is July 25th, 1987. 826 days later, my daddy, October the 28th, 1989, otherwise healthy, had a massive heart attack here one second, gone the next. My sister, 6,257 days later, lost her battle with a lifetime addiction to alcohol, just destroyed her body, and eventually just her body played out. Mama made it to 93. She lived another 10,000 days after Daddy died. We buried her a few years ago. And all I'm trying to point out is that I can take a picture at any given point in time, and what we're witnessing is the passage of days. And there's this, I hope you don't think this is morbid, but there's a website called deathclock.org. You can go there and take a questionnaire, do you smoke, do you drink, what do you weigh, how tall are you? It's going to basically see how healthy you are. And then at the end, it's going to project your death date based on all the actuary tables. And so if that's the case, 7,043 days from today, on February the 14th, 2041, I'm scheduled to check out of this joint and go to heaven.
So you update this regularly?
I update this regularly, and it's very sobering because the first time I did this, that was over 10,000 days. So 7 years ago, when I began to say, okay, how do I present in a compelling way information to people that might compel them to action? It compels me every time I update the numbers because I'm getting closer and closer to death. And so what it really illustrates simply is this. This image kind of says it all, does it not? You do realize that the Scripture is pretty clear, and this is a Sunday school. We ought to also share relevant information. The Scripture says you came into this world naked, and you're going to leave this world naked. Nothing you came into this world, and you will take nothing out. Unless somebody just chooses to dress me up in the casket, I came into this world empty-handed, I will leave empty-handed. Everything that this earth offers us, everything that we tend to value, to possess, to acquire, to accumulate, to amass, you do realize that none of it goes with you. And so, I use that old line, I've never seen a U-Haul behind. And I found a picture of it, and I said, well, I've got a picture of one right there. And so biblical principle number one, and I would say, as we kind of start sharing information, it's really just wise for us to state the obvious, and that is that God has designed us as mortal beings, that we do not live forever, that God numbers our days before any one of them is. He sets the limits. We can't live longer than that unless He chooses. We're going to die right on time, and He already sees that, and He's anxiously awaiting that date, because He rejoices when His kids get to come home to where He is. That's what Jesus is getting across to His disciples when He says, listen, I don't want your hearts to be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going to go prepare a place for you. If I do that, I most assuredly will receive you back into myself. And so God is anxiously awaiting for all of us to get back to the house. Kind of like Laura and I anxiously await for our kids to get home from college now when they're on break. We want to get our kids back to the house. So does God. And so God is going to turn us all back to dust. This is a couple of verses from Psalms. You just turn man back to dust. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, maybe if strength by 80. Soon it's gone. We fly away. So teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. It's unwise for you not to plan while you're alive what you want done at the point of your passing. And yet, the numbers have been higher. They're decreasing a little bit over the years. But probably 10 years ago, there was an alarming statistic from a study from a legal group that over 70% of Americans do not have a valid or current will. Or if they do, it's a very simplistic, one-dimensional will that they might have gotten off of the internet without any real intentional planning. It's just kind of a stopgap. And I'll be honest, I took this job 7 years ago and didn't have one. And so I'm not just preaching to the choir, I'm preaching to me. And so why is that? Well, it's because we don't like to think about dying, which is so ironic because we're all going to die. Amen? Alexander the Great, one of the greatest military conquerors of all time, had one guy and he had one job. His job was to pitch his tent next to Alexander's, and on the eve of every battle would follow Alexander around as he mounted his steed to go out into battle, and he would simply say repetitively, Alexander, Alexander the Great, someday you will die. And Alexander told him to do that simply because he wanted to never forget the fact that he was mortal. It creates a sense of urgency. And so mortality rate of human beings is 100%. All of us are going to die unless Jesus comes back for us and raptures us. If you believe in a pre-trib rapture, I sure hope that happens, and I hope it happens before I croak. But it's probably not. But we all have a death with death. We shouldn't fear death. And so I've given you several scriptures. I could rehearse them, but our time is a little short. Jesus has freed us from the fear of death. The book of Hebrews says, 2 Timothy says, God's not given us a spirit of fear. And so Paul in the book of Philippians even really grapples with this. He says, for me to die is gain. It's better for me. I'd rather die than stay here. And so we think about death wrong. And we process death wrong because it causes grieving. That's the irony, number one. But we ought to have our house in order because we're all going to die. It's a deliberate preparation for the inevitable passage from this life to the next. There's that moment in Hezekiah. Isaiah, the prophet, records it. It's recorded in the Kings. It's recorded in the Chronicles, where the prophet says to Hezekiah, the king, set your house in order, for you're going to die. Now, I've got a really good friend that just got a really awful medical report, and they've told him, listen, this is probably going to be terminal. So he called me out of the blue one day, one of my best friends, surgeon, has operated on me 4 or 5 times. I mean, a very dear friend. His name is Larry. I answered the phone. Hey, Larry, what's going on? He said, I'm at the graveyard. I said, oh, did you go to a funeral? And they said, no, I'm buying a plot. I said, what in the world for? Because I just got back from the doctor. And I've got a very aggressive cancer in my liver. He's a doctor, so he knows stuff. He said it's very resistant. It probably won't respond to chemo. It's too big to resect unless God intervenes. My friend Larry's all of a sudden facing an Isaiah moment where somebody is saying, hey, set your house in order, you're going to die. What if that was somehow we could hold that tension, look in a mirror and say that to ourselves today? What would we do? How would we do it? Would we be ready? Well, that's one of the things that we try to help people do. We try to help them create a sense of urgency where they say, hey, listen, don't fear death and don't leave this undone. Let me see if I can prompt you to some sort of action because we're here to help you. We're here to quarterback you through this process. And for the overwhelming majority of Texas congregants, we can get this done without any cost to you. All right? We're going to show you how to do that here in just a few minutes. And so when you set your house in order, what you're trying to do is provide for your family. That passage in Timothy says that if you don't provide for your family, you're worse than an unbeliever. And so part of my planning has to make sure that if something happens to me, well, Laura has everything that she needs, and my kids have everything I want them to have. But it also enables me to predetermine and control my legacy. Because I'll be honest, my kids would probably be hurt if I left them 100% of my wealth. I want them to be productive citizens. I want them to work. I don't want to create trust babies. So I want to not only predetermine my legacy, I want to model that for them and how I hope they live. And then I have the responsibility, the urgent responsibility, to be found faithful as a steward for all that God has entrusted to my care. I'll be held accountable for that. God has blessed me beyond measure. And if you're an American and you woke up with a roof over your head today, with climate control and food in your refrigerator and clothes in your closet, you are among the most wealthiest people on the face of this planet. You do realize that, right? So a lot of people that go through these seminars say, well, Pastor, I don't have much. I said, you don't recognize how much you have in relation to what God can do with the blessings. And so the scripture in Proverbs says that we are to honor the Lord with the first fruits of all of our produce. And so what our goal is then to honor the Lord in this role of a steward. I am a steward of everything that God puts into my responsible care. I don't own anything. God owns everything. I'm just touching it for a little while because I can't put it in the U-Haul and take it with me. I can't get this stuff that God has entrusted to my care from this earthly dimension to a heavenly dimension. But what God is saying is, well, the stuff that you'll have in heaven is subject to what you do with the stuff that you're doing here on earth. And so we're not supposed to lay up treasures here, we're supposed to lay up treasures there. And so as we seek to honor the Lord with our possessions, and we thought, well, we need to do seminars where we talk about some of the biblical precepts, and many times that's what I've done up to this point. I want to show how you can protect and provide for your family, how to control the distribution of your assets, how to avoid the stress and delays, cost of probate, and how to eliminate taxes or minimize them at least, and then how to make tax-deductible gifts to your favorite church or charity. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. I believe this next slide is 1 minute and 15 seconds. Somebody said I hope you're not a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and the answer is I am not.
Last week, good tough third down receiver. McNabb loading up deep for Deshaun Jackson. He hauled it in. Oh, wow. Did he get over the goal line? Did he get over the goal line? Yes, he did. Touchdown.
Whoa, puts more points up. It's fabulous pace. It's unbelievable.
I like this thing.
Hang on a second. We got to make sure he broke the plane on that, guys. And the Cowboys, I think, might challenge. Oh, it is very close.
That is close.
It's a great dance. Let's take a peep here.
Watches very closely. He has secured the football. Whoa.
The plane. Secondly, if you say he didn't, let's stop and do the news first. It's such a long play, you won't have a look right down the goal line. That is very close. The evidence would lead me to believe that he did not break the plane before getting rid of the ball. And who knows what's going on inside that helmet. Now, what happens to the ball afterwards? Adam Jones is out there. He walks away from the ball. Wasn't a backward pass and the ball dead there.
After review, the runner lost control of the football prior to going in the end zone. By rule, the ball
Now you're okay that I use this Philadelphia clip? Deshaun Jackson has done that 3 times in his football career. Did it once in college, done it twice in the pros. After review, the runner lost control of the football prior to going into the end zone. Can I suggest this to you? If you fail to deliberately plan your legacy through an effective Christ-honoring estate plan, you're going to fumble the ball right before you go in the end zone. Terry and I served a wonderful group of people. I've buried 147 of them. I keep a little black book, and yesterday Ron was the 147th entry. Some of the most faithful givers, tithers, supporters of the church in their earthly life. And yet what I never challenged them to do as their pastor was to set up their estates where they tithe on the remaining value of their estates. And so that's what it is. If we fail to finish our course by neglecting to put our house in order, and to recognizing that a significant percentage of the net worth of the average American household is comprised of value or assets that have never been subject to you even being able to tithe on. It's never been discretionary income. It's been accumulated asset value. And so if I fail to finish my stewardship journey responsibly and neglect to tithe on the value of that estate, then what I'm doing is I'm passing value to a generation without demonstrating to them what I hope I've demonstrated to my whole life, and that is Dad and Mom believe in tithing. We believe in supporting the church. And so if I give my kids value of assets without also tithing on that, I'm sending them mixed signals. And so it's just a way to reinforce your testimony. And so what is your estate? This is where we come in along and we coach you. So let's say at the end of this presentation you say, hey Bart, I'll take you up on that. If you'll help me through this, I'll get my house in order. Well, the first step is we would send to you what we call a wills guide, and you would begin to get your hands around what your estate is worth. What is an estate? Well, it's all the value of the assets that are under your care. It is all your homes, your real estate, bank accounts, life insurance, IRAs, heirlooms. Most people are worth more than they think they are. Personal belongings, stocks, bonds, it's all that you own, all that you control. And we try to get our hands around conceptually the understanding of the different categories of assets, because the different buckets of assets, categories, offer different opportunities as you plan for how to maximize what you can do with the legacy of your estate. And so, the majority of American wealth is not in cash. All right, less than 3% of the wealth in America is held in the form of cash. Less than 3%, which means all of us that are working, we're getting a paycheck and we're tithing on our discretionary income. That's cash moving in and out. And the remainder of our estate value is the value of assets that are not cash assets. And so the penny jar example is really the fact that even the overwhelming majority of my net worth today, it's not if I could just write you a check for that. It's the fact that I've bought real estate and the real estate is appreciated in value. I've invested in the stock market and those stocks have gone up, ridiculously. And so, what I try to point out is just that there's things in every household that have a value that far exceeds what you paid for it. I'm a piano player. My dad was a professional piano player, played for Lawrence Welk. I grew up in a musical family. I was a professional musician from the time I was 15. I started playing with my dad professionally. Always wanted a grand piano. My dad said, we don't have room for a grand piano. So when I got married, I bought a grand piano. And I found it at a bankruptcy auction, paid maybe 6 to 7 cents on the dollar what this piano is worth. There's only 200 of them manufactured in the world, which means every year the value of this piano goes up. Can I suggest that's an example of a capital appreciating asset. If I chose to sell that piano, and I may, if somebody offered me what it was worth, I'd put the stock market indicators. These are just snapshots in time. I went to work. My first day of work was September the 4th of 1984. The stock market was at 2,861. Today it's at 36,328, which means my daddy, when I went to work, said, now, boy, if you're smart, before you get married, you'll put as much money in your 401k plan as you can, because when you get married, Dave will tell you what those girls spend the money. And I said, okay, Dad. He said, just figure out what you need to live, pay your rent, pay your utilities, keep a couple $100 a month to play, put everything else in your 401k. I said, okay, Daddy. So I put 60, 70% of my salary in my 401k, and married a very frugal, Daddy was lying. I married Laura. She's almost as tight as I am. And so we've saved a lot. We put a lot in the stock market. It's just grown. It's just grown. And so when we're looking at estate planning documents, what we want to provide for you is the opportunity to get what we call your general business affairs, your durable powers of attorneys with respect to financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney, healthcare directives, and then the disposition of your asset documents, which include a last will and testament, and can and may include a variety of trust instruments if you have assets that are best cared for in a trust. We try not to go into detail in the General Assembly on these because it really just depends on what you have. But our work is to really say this is some of the options that you have. Here are some things that you could do, and let you prayerfully consider what God would have you to do. I'll tell you this, if you don't make some decisions on the distribution of items, you're positioning your kids to argue over things, and please don't do that. We're fortunate. We have one kid that's very nostalgic. She wants to inherit everything. I'm not sure my oldest daughter's going to even come to my funeral. I'm kidding. She's just not very nostalgic. In fact, it's funny, we'll buy something and Zoe will say, I'm going to inherit that. And Brunson says, whatever. So in a last will and testament, there's something called a personal property memorandum, and you can kind of specify, you get to talk to your kids and see what's important to them, see who gets what. But it also gives you the ability to recognize that there could be value in what you give away of your material possessions. If your goal is to keep them equal, it forces you to do some of those things. There are several roles in life planning documents: and executor, trustees, agents, guardians. We'll walk you through all these decisions you need to make, what they do, and then you can prayerfully go about that. But again, those are decisions we help try to get you informed on. I'll tell you what, if you're a young family here and you have a child, you really must have a will, because it's the will that specifies the guardianship issues for your underage children. So Laura and I traveled a lot together when our girls were young. The parents thought if something is probably going to take me out, it's going to take her out, because we're in the same car or in the same plane. And so we had to really grapple with, our kids are, they're not even 18. What happens if something happens to both of us? If you don't make guardianship issues, you're positioning somebody else to make them for you. And that's typically going to be a probate court issue. And the question is, will your children be raised by the person you want to raise them? So make sure that you get that covered. Taxes are not an issue anymore. They used to be. The life exclusion used to be very low. It's very high right now. So the majority of the states are well under 23.4 million. But don't kid yourself, they're going to take this back down. The current climate of the day with the way our government is spending money is that they're going to start whittling this back down to where this will become a very real issue. It was a very real issue when my daddy died of a heart attack. My dad's estate was worth more than Mom could shield alone, and so we had to do some very creative things when my dad died in order to avoid state taxes. They were legal, but they were creative. There's something called IRD taxes, which I don't care if you remember that. I call it dead man's income tax. The government is patient. They will take a bite out of your apple if you will let them. And so our work is to see your assets and say, whatever you do, don't make. This is very easy to shield. Make sure that if you feel like you've paid the government as much as you want to pay the government, then don't let them take a bite out of your apple. The uber wealthy have known this for generations. They've been preserving their wealth for generations. It's the average middle class family that the government has been taking some liberty with. So for instance, all my 401k assets, if something would have happened to Laura and I at the same time, before my kids would have received any value from those, they would have been taxed because they're moving generations. Which is why we now direct our 401k assets into a trust. It's just but again, these details are things that we work with you depending on what your estate looks like. There are many families. No two estates are the same, and no two families are the same. I'm from a blended family, for instance. My mom had two girls before she married my dad and had my brother and I, and so we had some blended family issues that we had to sort through. My family also had a prodigal or estranged child. My mom and dad's will made provision for my sister who died from alcoholism, but only if she was sober. And so, and even put a statement in the will so that my desires for you is for your recovery, but I will not give you the resources to continue to live as a drunkard. And so she predeceased both my mama, so we didn't have to deal with that issue. But the will was set up that way originally. But once you get this done, our job is to help you understand what your assets are, walk through some of the options, Prayerfully, it'll let you make some decisions, and then we move into how we get the things documented. But once your will is done, that you're finished. Change all the time. My will, my girls are now past the age of 18. One's fixing to graduate from college, but things change, and so should your legacy plans, which means you may update your will 3 or 4 times before you actually pass. Here's a picture of my brother's boy. I thought I'd have boys. I had girls. And my brother was always bigger than me, and I'm the younger brother. That's Tyler on the left and Vance on the right. Vance was always smaller, but something very interesting happened when he got into college. He started to grow. And Vance was the 55th pick in the second round of the NFL draft about 8 years ago. Most NFL players don't make it past their first contract, but if you do, let me tell you make some stupid kind of money. And Vance did. Played 8 years, retired last year after 4 years with San Francisco, 4 years with Pittsburgh. And I told my brother, who we'd worked through his will, I said, you know what, Vance really doesn't need your money anymore. And so Brett has sat down and talked with Vance, said, hey, listen, all things equal, I'm going to split this up between your 2 siblings. And so, you know, things change, and so should your estate plans. Awfully proud of Vance. He's a good Christian man and has done very well. But your whole point of this is to define your impact. You control your legacy, and you should control your legacy through your life planning documents on your family, on others, to your church, your causes, kingdoms, God's kingdom. And so our work is really just to help you think through some of those opportunities and those options, and then let you prayerfully decide. Here's some of the ideas that we offer. We strongly suggest that you tithe on your estate if it represents accumulated asset value for which you've never tithed on. Honor the Lord. Before you take care of your family, demonstrate that you're going to take care of your responsibility as a steward. We unapologetically will encourage you to include your church in your will planning because of that coming famine issue I preached about here this morning. A child's portion is where I've got 2 kids. What if I acted like I adopted Jesus and cut him in for a third? Would a third for both my girls be sufficient? Could I give a third to Jesus and just direct that to the church? We've had some people respond to that. There's a way to set up trust that your children can get value from that trust for a number of years, and then whatever's left after they get what you want them to get, the residual goes to a charity. And so that's called a give it twice trust or a charitable remainder trust. There's all sorts of instruments. And really the details of those, I think, are appropriate when we do our one-on-one shop talk with you, so to speak. Many people that are on fixed income respond well to charitable gift annuities. In fact, the joke is if you want to live forever, buy a charitable gift annuity, because a charitable gift annuity will ensure a monthly payment until you die. And the older you are, the higher the rate. So if you're living on fixed income on CDs at the bank, you need to buy a charitable gift annuity. Because you can name this church as the recipient of the residual, and you can guarantee then a set level of income for you for the rest of your life. But the bottom line is that we're encouraging you to pray and ask for God's direction. And I could go over some of this slide. I made an awful mistake in a special giving emphasis in the church that I pastored. God put on our heart an amount of money to give to a program that I didn't have cash in the bank. And so I sold an asset and then used the proceeds of that sale to honor our pledge. Also paid stupid capital gains taxes on it. What I should have done was gifted the asset into either a donor advised fund, let the donor advised fund sell it, and then give the money to the church. Bottom line is I could have cut the government out to the tune of about $32,000. And I just didn't know what I know now. So when sale of appreciated assets, stock gifts, mandatory distributions on your 401k, 403b assets, you can direct those directly to the church and keep those out of your taxable income. That's another thing that's fixing to happen. Retirement plans, insurance, there's all sorts of angles to this. And our work is really to get you educated on it so you understand how this all works. But the bottom line is, a planned gift, if I want to use that label, legacy planning, planned giving, a planned gift where you're intentionally informed and making a decision can help maximize your impact to God's kingdom by how you're stewarding the assets that God trusts to your care. Now, let me do this. We're supposed to be out of here in 10:15. You might say, I've got an evaluation form, and I want you to fill it out. If you want our help, it's completely free. All right? We will quarterback you through the process, but the foundation also pays a tremendous amount of money to provide resources to congregants that will put their church in their will. It's called freewill.com. The link is on our website, and we have an advisor even with that company. And I've asked him to do a short presentation. He's going to repeat some of the stuff I just said, but this is about 8 minutes. I wish it was about 5, but it is what it is. I'm going to play what he sent me.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad to have a chance to share with you about the partnership between Free Will and the Southern Baptist Texas Foundation, the ways that we can help with estate planning and the tools that are available to you because of this partnership. I'm excited to talk about what it looks like to partner together to create a flourishing expression of the kingdom in our midst. A little bit about myself. My name is Chris Hall. I'm the Partner Success Strategist, which simply means I'm here each step of the way. I assist your churches, the leadership here, and really offer feedback on the best ways we can use these tools moving forward. I grew up in North Carolina. I'm a huge fan of all things barbecue, the Blue Ridge Mountains, camping, hiking with my family. Those are my 2 boys, Crosby and Finley, there in the picture with me. I got my Master's of Divinity from Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee, and then worked in churches and faith-based ministries for the past 13 years. So I'm excited to share about these tools based on my own experience, my own faith, and how we can partner together to expand the kingdom. So quickly, what is free will? I just want to take a minute to explain why we were created and how we can partner with you. This slide right here demonstrates just a small portion of the reason we were created as a company. With 68 trillion being passed on in the next 20 years, we wondered, what if we could make sure a portion of that money went to fund good things in our communities and in the kingdom? One of the reasons I was excited to come work at Free Will was to be able to say, while donating to any nonprofit is a worthwhile investment, what if we could empower churches and people of faith to donate in these very specific and often unused ways to make sure that a percentage of our money went towards growing the kingdom and towards sharing our faith for generations to come. And as a company, we started with the fact that 70% of Americans don't have a legal or up-to-date will. Russell James is a former pastor and Bible college professor. He's a mentor to our CEO. He shares that the reason so many people don't have a will, 70% of Americans don't have an up-to-date or valid will, is simply related to education. It's getting the documents completed, making it easier to create these types of plans. The vast majority of us just don't know it's even an option or see it as too difficult, too expensive, too hard to figure out. Free will works to lessen that gap. And really, I think it's framed within the larger conversation of stewardship. I believe there's going to be a shift in stewardship in the church over the next few years. We've been spending the last few decades asking people to tithe, to give 10% of what God has blessed them with. But that doesn't cultivate a lifestyle of generosity necessarily. And it really misses the point of generosity within the Bible. As people of faith, we are supposed to be known for our generosity, that it becomes a lifestyle for us, not just something we check off our box. The reality is, right, God owns it all. When I was working in the church, we would often have these stewardship conversations, and I was wondering, why are we only talking about really giving out of our cash? We want people to be good stewards of the earth, of their relationships, of the blessings that God has given them. That includes assets that aren't cash. And here's what we're seeing. Americans only hold about 3% of their assets in cash, which means all of those sermons that I ever preached on tithing were really only about teaching people to be generous with 3% of what they actually had, 3% of what they'd been given to steward. But what if we had an option to be generous with all that God has blessed us with? And through estate planning, through this will writing option, we really do have that opportunity. So quickly, I just want to take you through a demo of our will flow, help you see how it works, and what it would look like for you to join in this process.
Okay, let me get you to stop it
So
right
the
there.
website
Can I
for
tell
you
you to stop
is
right there?
freewill.com/f.
So on our website, what he's doing right now is going in and saying, hey, listen, it's just a matter of going to a website, but you can go to our landing page. On Plan Giving, you can say create a free will. That's going to put you into a portal that's going to give you about a 2.5-minute video. It's going to tell you what free will can do, and there's a button underneath that says let's get started. It's intuitive. It's going to just start querying you for information that has got to be included in every will. Which means, while we don't prefer, you could have a valid will before you go to sleep tonight, just by going to our website. Now, I don't think you can have a valid, well-planned will before you go to sleep tonight. But you know what? If you don't have a will, I'm not too sure I would encourage you to go do one tonight, just as a stopgap, and then call me and say, hey, I checked the box because I needed one, but can you help me think through, should I update it? What can I do? Here's the bottom line, guys. Do not die without a will. Because if you die without a will, that's called, word just left me, intestate. And if you don't have a will, the state has one for you. And again, you don't get to direct it. It is what it is. And so this is something that you really need to take care of. You need to take care of if you have minor age children. And there are some creative ways to do this that can maximize the impact that you can have and the legacy you can create. So you have an evaluation in your lap. What do you do with it? Well, you may just want to fill it out and say, I want some more information. I want to be on your mailing list, or I want you to help me, and we will help you. Again, we don't do anything other than just try to keep you informed and positioned to make whatever decision God wants you to do. Sign up for our free newsletter, obtain individual assistance from a plan giving consultant. Even if we have to hire a lawyer, where we're creating trusts, if you're including your church in the will or tithing on your estate, we have even a reimbursement program. I'll just tell you a quick story as I close. Some lady years ago said, I want to leave the foundation some money. And she said, no, I want to leave you some money. She said, because ever since my husband died, I've been worried about this will thing. And this was with my predecessor. And you're the first person that's come and helped me get it done. So I'm going to leave you some money. And my predecessor said, well, what do you want me to do with this money? And she said, I want you to set up an endowment, and I want you to cover cover a portion of the cost for anybody that might find as an obstacle. Well, I don't want to do it because it costs money. Well, free will doesn't. But if you even have a complex estate, we have to engage lawyers. We have a reimbursement plan. As long as you finish the plan and get it signed and sealed, that we'll reimburse the first $500 of out-of-pocket expense. Bottom line is, we're just trying to be a service to the church and a service to you as God's children as it relates to this issue. Here's the bottom line. That's my contact information. Our website is pretty easy to remember, sbtexasfoundation.com. We are here to serve this church. We are here to serve you. But whatever you do, make it across the finish line. I told Vance, if you ever catch a pass and get a chance to score a touchdown, do not be a Deshaun Jackson bonehead. So, any questions? Can I do what? You don't like this slide? That's pretty cool. We are here local, and we are here to serve you. If you have no questions, I think we have, 20 minutes before worship starts. Pastor?
No question? Come on, give him a hard question.
The services are free. How are you funded?
It's a good question. Southern Baptist Texas Foundation is a wholly owned subsidiary, might be a way to understand it. Our sole member is our convention. The faithful cooperative program money that you flow through the system is what led to the creation of the foundation. Today, the foundation is funded completely through our ministry model, which means we don't make loans for free. This church, I think, invested $100,000 in CET investments. I don't know do you remember what term you used?
1 year.
1 year, which pays, 1.5 is a daily account. Yeah, so 1.88, we're paying you 1.88 on a $100 certificate. We're lending money at about 4 to 4.5. right now. We make our money, we fund our operations based on consulting income for churches that are in crisis through transitional real estate transactions through church lending. In the planned giving arena, we don't charge anything because we just don't need to. So, good question though. Glad you asked it. We're proud. We've seen God bless incredibly our work. 7 years ago when they hired me, the foundation was dependent upon the convention pushing money down into it. Today we push money back to our convention parent. We create surplus and put all that surplus back to work in the ministry. So this coming year we just approved over $500,000 of gifts to establish endowments and to support church planning, evangelism, things of that nature.
How many times do you typically meet with someone to consult about how to put the estate together or estate trust?
Yeah, so we do the asset gathering. We'll send you a document. We try to get you to fill that out. We can't fill that out. And some of this is very relational, right? If you ask me, hey, show me your most sensitive records, which is my stuff, my financial records, there's got to be some level of trust. Some people want that dynamic established before they move forward. And I've even said, hey, listen, everything that we do is confidential, which means even if you need to sign a confidentiality client, we don't share your information with anybody. We get the will done, we give it back to you, even if we suggest that you let us keep a cloud copy of it in case you ever want to change it and can't find it. It depends on the complexity. On average, for a very simplistic will, maybe 2-3 times. I just finished a case with a widow in El Paso that took 6 months. But she did some very generous things. She gave away 100% of her estate. She has no heirs. And her husband just passed away. She's a widow. And she's well into her 80s. And she's going to bless her church. She's going to set up endowments for seminaries to pay for seminary student education. She was a delight to work with. But what you do is you don't rush them. It took her a long time to figure out what she wanted to do. And so you're there just to hold her hand through the process. I didn't actually hold her hand, though, Laura. Just thought I would point that out.
Hey, Bart, I would say just a comment that you touched on, but I don't think a lot of people realize how powerful this is, that a person over the age of 72 is required to take
Yep.
a required minimum distribution
Right.
from the federal government out of their IRA,
Yes,
whether they want that money or not.
can direct it to a charity.
If they direct it to a charity or a church, they don't have to claim that as income. And I think 90% of people don't understand that.
Yep. And so when you reach a certain age, you've got to take mandatory distributions. It's taxable income, right? All the money in my 401k plan I've never been taxed on. They will tax it when they start to give it to me. But let's say God's blessed me and I don't need it. I can just say, well, send that to my church. And it's not taxable income to me, and it's a charitable contribution to the church. Life insurance, there's just a lot of things that I didn't know. And I'll be honest, I'm a pretty financial guy. I grew up as a financial guy. I didn't know any of this stuff when they hired me. Kind of begs the question, why'd they hire me, right? I guess I was the only one they could find to take the job.
All right. Hey, thank you, Bart.